Hey. Time for an out-of-this-world story from rSpace. Love is a lot like a science experiment. You hypothesize, you test, and sometimes things explode spectacularly. Today on rSpace, it's the one last fling theory. Fiancée wanted one last fling, so I left her, made her lose her job, and now she's facing karma alone. I, 32 male, have been engaged with my fiancée, Shannon, 29 female, for 3 years. Right from the beginning, we always had a lot in common, and that made it easy for an awkward guy like me to ask her out. We met 8 years ago when we were both in college. I was studying materials science, and she was studying computer science. There wasn't that much overlap between our fields, but we're both science nerds, and we spent a lot of time discussing breakthroughs in things like processors, battery technology, and others. It was during one of these discussions that I realized I loved her, and the rest was history. After college, I got myself a good job in a research lab, where I still work today. Shannon took a bit longer to find a job, but eventually she became a junior developer at some random startup. That startup is defunct now, but she's job hopped a few times, which tells me is normal in the software industry. And now she's a senior developer with an e-commerce platform. It's not exactly what she wanted, but she can't complain about the pay. Our life together was pretty good. We'd both worked hard to get to where we were, and we were both on the way in our respective professions. 3 years ago, I felt proud enough of where we were heading for me to propose to her. She said a very enthusiastic yes, and that same night, we started talking about starting a family someday. We started saving up to buy a house, and we even looked up good school districts for when we eventually had kids. She seemed just as committed to making this work as I was. I really thought we were building a good life together, but it was all about to fall apart over something completely stupid. One night, when we were both in bed after a long day of work, she told me she had something important to tell me. I closed the research I was going through, and she told me she'd been feeling restless recently. I asked her what she meant by that, and she explained that she'd never had a chance to explore when she was younger, and she felt like she'd missed out on the no-strings-attached lifestyle. I was silent for a bit. This was a weird topic for us to talk about. We'd both only dated 2 people before finding each other, so we were both a little bit inexperienced. I cautiously told her that I had sometimes wondered about it too, but in a detached kind of way. We were both happy with the lives we were living. I reminded her that a lot of the people living unattached lifestyles would be envious of what we had together. She clearly wasn't convinced, and that made my stomach clench. Right then, I could tell she was having second thoughts about our relationship, though I wasn't sure what exactly they were. I was incredulous. I asked if she, a successful woman in a relationship that most women her age would trade anything to be in, was seriously regretting not having a hoe phase when she was younger. With a straight face, she told me that she was. Worse still, she told me that she wanted to experience one last fling before we officially got married. She tried to sugarcoat it, saying it would be healthier for our relationship in the long run because it would help her feel more secure about our future. That was a load of crap, but she insisted on it, as if there was some kind of logic there. How was cheating on me while we were engaged supposed to build trust in the relationship? The whole situation hurt. One of the main reasons I'd been attracted to Shannon in the first place was because she wasn't the hoe type. She'd seemed to be the type that respected our relationship, and I'd always been loyal and committed to her in return. I've done everything I could to be the best partner I could be, and now she was acting like I wasn't enough. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. She couldn't feel secure in our relationship because she hadn't been bedded by half a dozen different guys when she was younger, so she needed to sleep with some random guy to be sure of the 8 years of love and commitment I devoted to her. I told her flat out that I didn't believe this was healthy and that I couldn't agree to it. To my surprise, she just looked disappointed and didn't push the matter any further. She dismissed it, saying it was just a stray thought, and that was the end of the discussion. Looking back, that should have made me suspicious. I shouldn't have let the matter go so easily, but I really wanted to put the ugly topic behind us, and I honestly thought it would be out of our lives after that. And it was, until 2 weeks later when I found my fiancée's phone on the kitchen counter while we were cooking. A notification popped up from her friend, Vanessa, and the content of the message was enough to make me suspicious, combined with the fact that Vanessa was one of those friends that was still living a proud hoe phase. I knew I had to dig deeper into it. While she was busy over the stove, I swiped her phone from the counter and made some lame excuse and left. I locked myself in the bathroom before I unlocked the phone and pulled up her messages with Vanessa. As I scrolled through their conversation, I felt my stomach sink. The texts were much worse than anything I could have imagined. They were talking about Shannon's last fling. It turns out she'd done more than just talk about it. She'd actually gone through with it. The texts with Vanessa were vivid, with no lack of detail, and no sign of guilt. She was bragging about hooking up with Lance, one of the junior developers from her work. I recognized his name. He worked under her on her team. They'd been meeting up after work to have some no-strings fun. I felt sick with anger. Shannon was describing her affair as if it was some sort of personal victory, saying she felt empowered and liberated to have sex without emotional attachments. Meanwhile, Vanessa was egging her on, calling her fearless for living her best life. It was like I didn't know who Shannon was anymore. The woman I'd fallen in love with would never do something like this. Out of curiosity, I scrolled back to their messages from earlier than our discussion, and I confirmed what I had been suspecting. Vanessa was one of the ones who planted this stupid idea in Shannon's head in the first place. That didn't excuse Shannon a bit, though. She was a grown woman who should know well enough to distinguish between good advice and idiotic ideas that should be ignored. I stormed down to the kitchen, furious. When she saw me, she put down her utensils and asked if I was okay. I tossed her phone back onto the counter and said, "I saw your messages with Vanessa." She stared at me for a moment and then went back to what she had been doing before I walked in. She tried to play it off, saying, "It was just a fling," and insisted that she had told me about it. There was no apology, no regret in her eyes. She just shrugged at me as I stared at her in disbelief. I struggled to keep my anger under control and told her that she hadn't told me that she was actually going to sleep with someone. We discussed it and both decided it was a bad idea. She shrugged again and said she changed her mind. "It was just something I needed to do to know for sure." I was disgusted with her. I said she couldn't just change her mind on something like that because it affected both of us. She hadn't been having a fling like she kept saying. She had cheated on me, plain and simple. Every time I mentioned cheating, her face would darken like she was annoyed at me for daring to insinuate that she had cheated. I didn't care, because that's what she'd done. She'd cheated on me, and now she was casually putting away utensils as if she hadn't just nuked our relationship. I asked her what she needed to know for sure. In the same casual tone, she said she'd been looking for clarity on whether we were really meant to be together. I wanted to pull my hair out. It was so infuriatingly stupid. I wanted to grab her by the shirt and shake some sense into her. Instead, I asked her if the 8 years we'd been together wasn't enough proof that our relationship worked. She just looked at me like I was overreacting again. She just said it was healthy to explore before committing, and that people do it all the time. I realized there was no getting through to her. She was standing there acting like her last fling was some minor bump in the road, while I was acting like the life I wanted to build with her crumbling in front of me. The worst part was that she wasn't sorry in the least. I would have felt better if she'd begged and cried, but she only cared about defending her right to do whatever she liked without facing consequences. Her casual attitude about all of this cut deep. I couldn't see the woman I loved in the person who stood in front of me, treating this betrayal like a harmless little experience. I told her I needed time to think, and that I would be spending the next few days at a friend's place. That's when she started to realize just how badly I was taking this, because she finally stopped sorting utensils and came up beside me. First, she said that I needed to take it easy, that we had talked about it. That was my breaking point. I shouted that she knew damn well that I hadn't given her permission to get drilled by another guy. She stayed silent after that. I'm usually a quiet guy, and I think she's only seen me shout once or twice, so she was visibly shaken by my outburst. I didn't have it in me to feel bad. She didn't deserve my pity. I left her in shock in the kitchen and stormed around the house packing my things. She didn't bother to follow me or say anything. She could tell that she'd really screwed up, and I think she was scared of setting me off again. When all my stuff was in my car and I was getting ready to drive away, she came up to my window to try again. She finally tried apologizing, but it was too late. I told her I would get in touch with her when I was ready. I'm at my friend's place now, still shattered from what happened. I don't know what was worse, the fact that she cheated on me or how she acted like it was nothing. What I do know is that I'm done with her. The sooner I cut her out of my life, the sooner I can start putting my life together. But throwing 8 years away like that is such a painful prospect. I don't know where I'll begin after this. I don't know what to do. The fact that she acted like this was a minor issue shows a disconnect in how she values the partnership. Cheating isn't something that just happens. It's a choice, and she made it while disregarding your feelings entirely. Her lack of remorse or accountability only makes things worse. Walking away was the right call, OP. Update. Shannon bombarded me with texts. At first, it was all apologies, mixed with her insisting that we had talked about it, and it was a misunderstanding. She sent things like, "We can fix things if we both try," and "We can't end things over this." I kept ignoring her, and eventually the tone of her messages started to change. She went from apologizing back to justifying what she did, saying that exploring was part of figuring out what she wanted long term. She even had the audacity of suggesting that I should try to have a fling too, so I could see how liberating it felt. She seemed to think that if I tried, I'd understand why she did it, and magically come around to her side. Or maybe she thought letting me sleep with someone else would be enough penance. I didn't reply to any of her messages. I was already done with her and didn't want to put myself through the pain of listening to her. Instead, I called someone else, the wife of the guy she cheated with. Yeah, the guy was married and even had a kid. Just another level of sadness in this whole pathetic affair. I knew the guy only vaguely, and I knew his wife even less. I knew her name was Amy, and that was enough for me to find her social media. I sent her a message detailing everything that my fiancé and her husband had been up to. Understandably, she didn't believe a word I had said, at first. I hadn't bothered to record any of the messages on Shannon's phone. I hadn't thought I'd need them. Luckily for me, she'd sent plenty of incriminating evidence directly to my phone herself, in the form of her apology messages. The messages more or less amounted to a confession of guilt from her, but one in particular, "It wasn't serious, there's nothing between Lance and me," was enough to convince Amy that her husband had been mixing business with pleasure. Naturally, she was devastated to hear what her husband had been up to at work. Amy and I exchanged a few messages after that, and she told me she'd be confronting Lance that night. She asked me to stay in touch, saying that it would help her feel less alone in dealing with this, and I agreed. I couldn't help but feel a little bad for her. She was in a similar situation to me, and I was the one who had broken the bad news to her. I knew it wasn't my fault that she was in this mess, but I kind of felt like I owed it to her to at least provide moral support. Later that night, she told me about the fallout of their confrontation. She had tried to kick Lance out of the house, but he refused to budge, so she was staying with an aunt of hers. She'd taken her child with her, leaving Lance home alone. That gave me some sense of satisfaction. I was glad to know that both he and Shannon were both stuck alone with their guilt. I had an update for her as well. I told her that Shannon had texted me, asking why I'd told Amy about their affair. She accused me of ruining their marriage and taking things out of proportion. She said I didn't need to involve people from outside our relationship in our problems. I'd replied telling her that she'd invited an outside person into our relationship, and her body, first. Of course, I left out that particular line in my retelling to Amy. Unlike Shannon, Amy didn't think I'd done anything wrong by telling her. She said it was better for her to find out now rather than later. She said she and Lance were still talking through it, trying to figure things out, but she was so angry that she wanted to get back at him. I was angry at Shannon too, but I'll admit I hadn't considered getting back at her. I asked what she had in mind. Amy pointed out that her company had strict rules against employee fraternization, and their little affair was a definite violation of that. They'd both probably get a suspension in the least, especially if we both kicked up a stink about it. We discussed it, and both decided that we were in fact pissed off enough to kick up a stink. That night, we got on a call and worked together on an email that she would send to their company. We decided that it would have more impact coming from her because she was the spouse of the lower-ranked employee. We felt the company would feel more compelled to take action based on that. It was some time past midnight when we had an email that we felt was suitable. It contained all the receipts, messages that she had lifted from Lance's phone. They were ugly. She had given me the gist of them and had offered to spare me the more explicit texts, but I'd insisted on seeing everything. Call it morbid curiosity, but I wanted to know the exact depths of her betrayal. It wasn't pretty. She sent the email to them the next morning, and it only took them a few hours to send a reply to her. My guess is that they had some software scanning their emails for certain words. This email certainly would have been full of trigger words. In their response, they assured us that they took these kinds of complaints very seriously. They promised to take immediate action, the usual corporate stuff. Surprisingly, though, they did get on it right away. It didn't take them long to conduct an investigation where they discovered messages that had been sent using company channels. There was clear evidence of inappropriate conduct. Just like we'd expected, it was worse for Shannon because she was his superior. Lance was lucky. He got off with a suspension. Shannon, on the other hand, had committed an unforgivable offense in the company's eyes, and she was let go. After Shannon's firing, she started trying to reach me again. I answered her this time. She blamed me for ruining her career, saying I had destroyed everything over a meaningless fling. I told her that she had done that herself. She'd slept with a coworker, sabotaging both her relationship and her career. I told her she'd lined up the cards for her own downfall, and karma had done the rest. It turned out that karma wasn't done with her. As bad as the job market is now, it's still sort of relatively easy for good senior developers to land a new role. They're usually in pretty high demand. But Shannon was struggling to get a single bite. This wasn't me guessing. She told me so herself. She was trying to make me feel bad for her, but I really didn't care. Well, that's not entirely true. I relished that information. I told her that I was angry at her for ruining our relationship, but I was mostly just disappointed that she had taken idiotic advice from her airhead friend. I still couldn't believe that Shannon had been stupid enough to buy that line, needing to explore before committing. Shannon's voice shook as she told me she had nothing left. She claimed that her fling had shown her that I was the person she'd want to spend the rest of her life with, but now that was gone. She also whined that the career she'd been working so hard on was done as well. I told her that if she'd needed to be run through by another guy to figure out that I was the one, then she didn't deserve me at all. I also told her I was glad that she was considered toxic in her industry now. I said she was still young. She had time to pivot to something else. If all else failed, there was OnlyFans. I also provided her with a bit of parting advice before I blocked her number for good. I told her Vanessa was a bitter, forever single who thrived off sabotaging other women's relationships, and she had won. It was in her best interest to cut her out of her life for good. Lance got back to work a few weeks ago, but he's considered quitting because he can't stand the whispers and the glances. Amy told me where she and Lance landed in their relationship. They're getting a divorce. Apparently, a former coworker came forward and revealed that she had a physical relationship with him back when they were working together. That was enough for Amy to decide to call it quits. Amy and I are still pretty good friends, and because I know this kind of question usually comes up, we're not dating, and we don't have any plans to. We're not the other's type, and we both need some time away from dating. I'm not sure I'll ever be able to fully trust someone else again. Still, it's good to have each other's backs. We're both providing support for each other on our individual journeys to pick up the pieces of our lives. Honestly, OP, your response to her was masterful. Straightforward and full of accountability she desperately needed to hear. Shannon gambled with her relationship, her job, and her reputation, and she lost. Her blaming you for her downfall is peak deflection. She made her choices and now she has to live with them. Do you have a similar story? Let us know in the comments below. And thank you for joining us today on rSpace. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. See you next time.